Welcome to We Can Do Better, a podcast about ending poverty in our time. My name is Fran Quigley. I am your host. I'm a law professor. I go to eviction court every week with my students. And in that court, we represent some of the millions of people in this country who are facing the loss of their homes. These folks are also skipping filling prescriptions. They're also even going hungry, despite living in the richest nation in the world. We can do better. This podcast lifts up the many people and organizations working to make housing, healthcare, and a decent life enforceable human rights for all. We've mentioned before on this podcast that a large percentage of people we see in eviction court are losing their homes, and they also are parents of young children. In fact, the most common demographic of people losing their homes for eviction are children ages 1 through 5. Part of the economic struggle that they face is the price and availability of childcare. So that is why we are very excited today to host Jacob Vigil, who is the Chief Legislative Officer of New Mexico Voices for Children. New Mexico Voices for Children is one of the driving organizations behind their state becoming last November the first state in the country to launch free universal childcare for children from birth through age 13, regardless of household income. There are no income limits. There are no copays. Families can choose the care that works best for them. That includes centers and includes home-based programs, home-based providers, language immersion or faith-based programs, and care during evenings or weekends. So, Jacob, welcome to We Can Do Better. All right, so Jacob, if we may start off and not bury the lead here. How did this wonderful thing come to be? There's no way that something this terrific and ambitious happened without a whole lot of advocacy, a whole lot of messaging, a whole lot of legislative work that you do, that you lead for New Mexico Voices for Children. So if you can, in a nutshell, what was the campaign about and what was the journey like?
Yeah, absolutely. You're totally right on that. This effort, this campaign, this victory, absolutely did not happen overnight. I think really a campaign, a movement, a coalition that kept its eyes focused on New Mexico children and families, that centered the voice of the people closest to the challenges, some of whom you described, right? So that those folks were leading the solution, and focus on building lasting infrastructure of a system that can work for children and families. And so, it really took years. Back in 2009, 2010, New Mexico Voices for Children and a few other advocacy and organizing groups got together and really kind of put their heads together to think about what would move the needle, what would make a difference for children in New Mexico, recognizing that our state had long been ranked last in many rankings in terms of child well-being, right? We have a lot of persistent, historical, generational poverty here, a history of extraction and economic injustice and racial inequity, right? And so all of that was at the forefront of folks' minds. And I would say that, it really kind of began, I use the term a revenue campaign because it was about identifying a source of funding, and the policy intervention, which we identified as early childhood care and education, but looking really for those resources, right? And understanding like, this isn't just about getting a small piece of, a pie, every state's different, but the budget pie, often is it feels very finite, right, or very fluctuating, right? So the organizing, the folks who work in the field, right? Childcare workers, educators, and then a broad campaign that really brought in more folks, including immigrant rights organizers, youth, the sort of traditional early childhood advocates, but also many others who had not been in this space, and really leveraging a legislative campaign, right, to get a constitutional resolution passed so it could go to the voters, which took, about 10 years to get that passed. And then many things along the way in terms of strategy and compromises and or decisions about or the C4 work, right, was a piece of it as well. The changing the complexion of the legislature so that it was more amenable to eventually the passage, but also um, accumulating sort of smaller victories along the way that ended up being really important stepping stones and building blocks toward the final goal, which was getting that funding from the Land Grant Permanent Fund, which the voters approved in 2022 by 70%. And yeah, that will form the basis, but certainly was not the only or the last step in getting to universal childcare, right? So that's a whole other sort of section of the story after that campaign up till this last year.
Okay. That's great. Now you mentioned C4 for folks who don't know. I assume you're referring to 501c4, which is when a nonprofit can do lobbying, which sounds like that's a lot of what you do is lobbying legislators. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's part of what we do. I mean, I do. We're a C3, so
Okay.
my lobbying is limited, but the C4, yeah, I'm mostly referring to kind of like that electoral campaign work.
Okay. And so you mentioned it at one stage, in a really important stage, that in 2022, 70% of the voters supported a childcare at the statewide level. So what kind of messaging? I mean, I guess if I could compartmentalize it, when you're talking to lawmakers, and you already mentioned having to find the revenue, I assume when you talk to lawmakers, you have to have a different kind of message, or at least a different variation of message than you do when you're talking to the public. So if I could ask you kind of that two-part question, what message worked best with legislators and lawmakers and presumably people in charge of budgets? And what message worked best with the general public that eventually endorsed this by 70%?
Yeah, so I think what some of the things that really resonated with lawmakers were sort of framing childcare as an economic issue and a children's issue, right? This is about workforce. Our state needs highly qualified, diverse professionals who can like build our economy, people to be able to work and go to school, and so that economic argument I think held a lot of weight. I think the fact that affordable childcare helps businesses, workers, and communities is not just individual families that benefit from it. So there's so many sort of resonating impacts from that, and that long term, right? That long term dedicated funding, right, is something that allows childcare to be that sort of that universal, what do we call what do we call it, the like something that everyone should have access to, right?
Yeah, well, we
There's
use
just,
the human rights term. I'm a
yeah,
lawyer, so we use that term a lot.
absolutely.
Don't try to legalize everything, but that's how that's how we frame it usually.
Yeah, and it's not just about workforce support, right? I mean, we're talking about brain builders. We're talking about education, safe, healthy environments where children's brains are growing and they're being nurtured in community by through those nurturing relationships. The science backs that up. I think that was another big thing of throughout those years of the campaign is we were able to show and build champions in the legislature who could understand, like, yeah, this does investing in those early years particularly just has so many good benefits down the road in terms of health outcomes, educational outcomes, right, societal costs, right, and so that being children's advocates, right, we're able to emphasize that. But then for communities, voters, right, we're talking about something that I think this word is very much in vogue right now. But this idea of affordability, but is salient. But I think more, it's like it's bigger than that, right? It's about economic justice. It's about these resources, whether it's like in your state at the wealth generated in your state through taxes, or in our case, right, we're sort of a resource, a natural resource dependent state, oil and gas. That is something that should come back and benefit communities. That we should think collectively about what our lawmakers invest the budget in, and I think communities really saw that as resonant, like pre-K, childcare, home visiting. Those things are things that could help their children get ahead and just make life a lot easier for families. who are struggling with the exorbitant costs of childcare, right? And we all know the statistic. I think about up to $12,000 a year is what
Hmm.
families are saving, not because they get to keep in their pocket by having free childcare. And so, yeah, just makes sense that this is really kind of catching on and around the country.
Yeah. Well, we certainly see clients who have been struggling to pay rent, but their childcare costs are about equal to their rent. I mean, they're literally paying as much to have their kids cared for as they are to keep a roof over their head. And so, like you say, that's a challenge that is not just for low income families. Middle income families and even high to middle income families can really struggle with the cost of childcare. And that, of course, keeps some parents out of the workforce or keeps them unreliable members of the workforce, perhaps if they don't have a strong and consistent childcare. So it's interesting, isn't it, that businesses oftentimes will be almost reflexively anti-tax or at least concerned about it. But this is as you mentioned, a workforce issue. So did you have members of like small business communities or chamber of commerce types, et cetera, come and be supportive of this, saying that if we have universal childcare, it's going to help us keep our workers, safe and showing up and consistent in the workplace?
Yeah, I would say we did. I think that that was important, having the business community uh, on board and really catching that vision, right? Understanding like what that means for them, right? I mean, this is not childcare isn't really a partisan issue. It's an economic issue. It's about education. I think those folks in the business community care about education. They care about a stable workforce, and so. Um, yeah, that was definitely the case. I think, and it also helped that we're not right in New Mexico's particular case. We were not advocating for sort of a new tax or raising revenue in that way, but we're looking at really kind of tapping a permanent fund, a source of revenue that our state had that would not impact the taxpayer.
And so can you talk a little bit about that revenue? Because I do think that's going to be something that certainly we and other advocates across the country are going to, you don't run into a lot of people who would say having universal childcare or at least greatly expanded childcare is a bad thing. But then you get that question, oh, how are you going to pay for it? So what was the answer in New Mexico that you came to, that this is a way that we can afford this and be the first state in the union to do it?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that'll give me a chance to maybe talk about kind of how we got from the campaign to the actual current universal childcare. Because I think the executive leadership in our state played a huge role in that. That should actually absolutely be acknowledged, concurrent with and subsequent to the campaign. It was really grassroots led. But the source of revenue in New Mexico, we have a land grant permanent fund that is sort of a sovereign wealth fund that comes through the production of oil and gas. We're the second largest oil producing state in the country, and just experienced a real big boom in the last several years with that. So in order to increase the distribution from that fund to the state budget required a voter approved constitutional amendment. So that's what we were fighting for. But in that story, I think that it's important to recognize that there were some compromises and ideas that popped up before that that won at the ballot box, including the creation of another dedicated trust fund. We call it the Early Childhood Trust Fund, that also comes from oil and gas revenue, and that almost entirely funds universal child care right now.
Mm.
And that fund wouldn't exist without sort of the long, years long effort as well. And then two other things would be the creation of a dedicated early childhood department. States around the country are more and more doing this. I think Illinois is the most recent one to have their own dedicated department. So we set up ours in 2020. And then it was the COVID pandemic and the use of federal ARPA relief funds that our governor sort of leveraged very heavily to increase eligibility, to sort of salvage the subsidized childcare sector, and then raise eligibility to 400% and eliminate copays. And then once the federal funds expired, our state funds through the land grant permanent fund and the early childhood trust fund were able to kind of seamlessly fill in the gap. And so we had that source of revenue to continue that eligibility. And then fast forward a couple years, and the governor announced, okay, we're just going to eliminate all remaining income barriers, and it will be free for everyone. And so that's how we got where we are. And certainly the coalition may, remains a very important and critical voice in this process, because we're still active. We're still making sure that the implementation, the workforce issues, compensation and wages, that those are still addressed as we're building this system very rapidly. And so that's very much ongoing work.
Well, I don't want to minimize what you accomplished, because among the other aspects you mentioned that the ARPA funds were used, American Rescue Plan, right? Funds were used to extend childcare, which is wonderful, but those funds were available across the nation, and a lot of ARPA programs across the nation, maybe I would venture to say probably most of them, are very much underfunded now, or even extinct because the money did run out. But you all managed to figure out a way to keep the dollars flowing after the COVID relief inspired funds had run out. So that's amazing. And so I'm interested, when you talk with folks, you mentioned Illinois, when you talk with folks around the nation, which I know you do a lot of because you all are an inspiration to folks around the nation, where do you see the difference between New Mexico now having universal childcare and other places that may have hodgepodge of programs or pieces, or be hopefully steps along the journey that you've already reached the destination? What's different about New Mexico compared to the other states where this hasn't happened yet?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if a whole lot is. I think what is more sort of maybe surprising or hopeful is that there's a lot more that's similar, right? I think one thing that makes New Mexico unique is our sort of fiscal and our political circumstances, right? We had a big sovereign wealth fund. I think that, like, only Alaska's sovereign wealth is larger than ours, the combination of our trust fund and the permanent fund. And not every state can replicate that, right? But I think the other issues are very similar, right? We're talking about the availability of care in communities, right? That meets families' needs, home-based, center-based, whatever it might be. The chronic and historical and persistent uh, uh, underpayment of childcare workers, right? Earning poverty wages, right? That was real a systemic issue here, as it is pretty much everywhere. And so these issues were not resolved or solved when we made this big change, right? So these are things that we're still working on. But what I do tell states, right, like the things, and then of course we had the political leadership and will and circumstances here. But what I tell other states is that we began with a revenue idea. You can begin with a revenue idea, and I think that every state has sort of not just the possibility to, like, look at their state budget for grassroots folks, everyday folks, to be like, hey, why we're giving tax breaks to millionaires, billionaires, or corporations coming in, data centers are coming in. What a grassroots campaign that, like, gets real fired up about that allocation of revenue, about who pays their fair share in tax revenue, right, should be a conversation about things like childcare, right? It's not just like tax the wealthier corporations, but what can that be used for, right? So that's one thing that I think organizers, advocates in every state can do. The other thing is that broad grassroots organizing campaign, right? Like, every state has uh, advocates and voices in their communities. Some who have been engaged for a long time in childcare and early childhood issues. Some who never have, right? But, like, they can be joined up in a campaign that is about economic justice and thriving, and families having what they need, because everyone cares about costs, right? Housing costs are rising, food insecurity, healthcare. This is one thing that I think everyone can get behind. So that's what I tell states, right? Those are the things that every state can can do.
Okay. Well, and as you mentioned, starting with the revenue, because then arguably the case is easier after that, because it does help businesses, it does help the community, and like you say, that the science is behind you. Um, you mentioned that the governor recently, I think it was last November, uh, expanded the program so that there is no more income limits. It's universal. And I wondered if that mattered. And even when you had it before, it was universal at a pretty high income ceiling in terms, I think folks who are 400% of federal poverty were entitled to access the program. We're used to dealing with representing very poor people, and they're dependent on programs like the TANF program, Temporary Assistance to Needy Families, or even food stamps, which seems like they're constantly being attacked, they're constantly being reduced, et cetera. And the folks who benefit from them are not very politically powerful, and they're not a very big political bloc in terms of just pure population too. So does it matter? Is it helpful for the political building and now political survival of the program that it's universal, that you do have folks who are middle income, who are maybe more active in their communities, folks who are even high middle income who benefit from the program? Does universality actually help in terms of the program's political health?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, I've heard, we've talked about this term, right? The durability, the political durability of policies that are sort of seen as a universal right, right, for all folks of all income wages. I mean, I think that's the truth, right? I think that it became much more difficult for policymakers to sort of oppose this or argue against it when you had more folks saying, hey, like um now I'm eligible and I've gotten my child into this center, and it's gonna that's not something they want to give up. But I will say though that there the flip side of that I think comes from like uh the perspective of policymakers who are stewards of, right, the state budget and have to make uh tough fiscal decisions, and they I think there definitely was a lot of conversation, more conversation about like, well, is this something we should be giving our what a lot of people perceive to be limited resources to folks who are at the higher end of the income scale. And so there were, in the final bill that was passed to codify the program into law, there actually were some fiscal safeguards that were put in that when if economic conditions meet certain um, uh, or get to a certain point, then like co-payments and wait lists will kick in for the
Yeah.
highest income. That hasn't happened yet. We don't anticipate that happening. But it was sort of a concession that recognized that, like, hey, we don't want to like have to make cuts in this. We don't, and we're used to sort of riding that revenue roller coaster of oil and gas prices and production. I think what insulates us from that a lot is that we have created these sovereign wealth funds that are growing so quickly and so massively in and of themselves that they are not so dependent on the energy market. So we're a little bit more insulated from that. So I'm confident that we will continue to sustain this, right? But that is something that, having that universality makes it, I think, that much more durable.
Yeah. Well, I hope you never have to face that time, but it'd be interesting to see what would happen, because the cliche is that social security is the third rail of U.S. politics. Don't you touch it and you die, because all of us benefit from it, right? It'd be interesting to see whether, again, hopefully you never face that, if they try to take the proverbial soccer mom's childcare subsidies away, if that would actually be politically toxic for the lawmakers. Um, you mentioned the folks bringing their kids to a child care center, but the program actually provides access to home based providers and faith based programs and evenings and weekends, et cetera. Was there a discussion along the way about the different types of childcare? Because I know that for individual families and sometimes for communities, they have to make choices about what are we going to prioritize, the actual larger centers, or the auntie down the street who takes in 3 or 4 kids at a time? Was that something that you all discussed when the program was being built?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, to the extent that the a mixed delivery system is sort of the foundation, right? It's, and I think this is true most places in America, right? We have this really robust mixed delivery system where you have home-based providers, private, center-based, for-profit, school-based, faith-based, all those things. And so I think as even before, years ago when we had a lot lower eligibility and fluctuations in the budget. I think that the goal was really to make sure that all the care was accessible and that it was high quality. And so, like, most states have implemented like a quality rating improvement system or a star rating system that like gets the professionalization of the field, and the increased emphasis on quality and education has really been across the board. New Mexico's no exception to that. And so when we were starting to expand eligibility and make this universal, there really still was a recognition that like all those providers need a way to be a part of this system. And what that means, it looks like different things, right? It's like, how do we guarantee that that folks are being paid well enough? How do we guarantee that the home-based providers have the support they need to set up their businesses and meet the quality and safety requirements to get licensed and things like that in their home? And how do we recruit and bring on and make it more easier for providers of all types to operate in the areas where they're needed, right? So those were already things we were working on systemically, right? So that didn't change with the announcement. I think what the announcement and the removal of eligibility barriers did was kind of accelerate that movement. And I think, to the credit of the department and the governor, like they really kicked into high gear, recognizing like, okay, we just built demand, but now we have to really work on the supply. And they've really been doing that. We've increased our slots by thousands. It's still a lot of work. There's still a lot of work to be done, but we're everyone's sort of engaged and all hands on deck in making that happen. So
That's just so great. Well, I'm sure one of the challenges when you're increasing your slots by the thousands are finding workers who will do the work and be high quality childcare providers, but also themselves be paid living wages and work in good working conditions. I have to say, in eviction court, we not only see a lot of families who struggle to pay for childcare. Unfortunately, we see childcare providers who are making very low wages and for various reasons are facing the loss of their homes because they're just on that economic red line. So, what does the program do to ensure that the workers themselves are making a living wage and able to care for themselves and their families as while they care for other people's children too?
yeah, that's a great question, and that issue of compensation has really been at the heart of what the coalition and what advocates have been pushing for. I think one of the great things our state has done is switch to a cost model, uh, sort of uh, method of paying for childcare. So, like, reimbursing providers based on the cost of care. And so reimbursement rates here are really high. Providers get compensated really well per child. And the state has done a number of things to kind of incentive, or things like we have a infant toddler pay parity pilot program. We have most notably, I think, a wage and career lattice that stakeholders have kind of put together and designed. And that was in the works before this announcement of universal childcare. And so what we're hoping to see is that wage and career lattice is funded and implemented, because what that would do is really kind of create a wage and compensation structure that's tied to education and experience, and in across all levels of employers or employees in a childcare setting, right? So from the center director to the support staff to the educators to the caregivers, right? It would help address that compensation issue. So that's still in the works. and funding for that was included in this last this last state budget that we advocated for. So yeah, and I think our state really recognizes that the providers are the linchpin. They're the foundation of this system. They're the ones there working with the kids, building, educating them, building young brains. And so we can't have those folks, having to depend on public benefits when, particularly when, folks at the higher end of the income scale are getting this huge benefit of subsidized childcare. Right? It doesn't sit well with policymakers. It's just not. I think that's the additional piece of the economic justice argument, is having this be a viable career where people can really make a living and be compensated well for doing the work that they love. And as in most places, the childcare workforce is largely women of color, and so it really also is that racial justice issue as well.
Yeah, yeah. And in the reading that I've done before our conversation today, it was really interesting to see the ways that, because this is a government program, that there's ways to build in incentives that maybe isn't so necessary, isn't available in a true solely market-based program. So if correct me if I'm wrong, I see that there's extra benefits and incentives for a childcare provider to be paying $18 an hour or more for their workers, to stay open 10 hours or more a day, to be more convenient for working families. And that's really interesting. Have you seen that those incentives, do provide that, or do cause wages to go up and availability to be increased?
Yeah, I think that's been a great start. I think, yeah, the enhanced rate is what you're referring to, which that was implemented with this universal childcare, and it's a really great start, because it does provide that added incentive for owners and providers to pay their workers well, and that's good for retention, that's good for quality. Um, I think that the long term solutions, I think, need to be a little more systematic. When you have a base wage that's higher, you might run into issues of compaction, where people have been in the field a long time or higher up on the seniority scale. Can't Providers can't afford to, or it's hard for them to like also raise those folks' salaries, right? And so we need something that's sort of comprehensively addresses that responsibly uses public funds to compensate workers well, recognizing the whole range of staff who go into making a childcare business or childcare site really work. But yeah, the incentive and the enhanced rate was really a great step toward acknowledging that, yeah, we need to have at least a minimum, a floor of what we're going to say that folks who are educating our children and caring for them should earn.
Yeah. So in terms of the good problems that 49 other states would like to have, I'm sure that you do have, even with the universal child care program, some challenges, not only for childcare and administering of that, but other, against New Mexico Voices for Children, other children, child-based economic issues. So what are the current challenges you're working on to make this program as good as possible, and other economic issues surrounding the childcare and the well-being of young people in your state?
Yeah, well, we work on a range of issues. My background in particular has been childcare and early childhood care and education, but I oversee a team of analysts and experts who work on everything from healthcare and health policy to public benefits, food insecurity, um, income and wealth, immigration policy, and climate policy in particular. So we're looking at all of the things that really kind of impact holistic child well-being and family economic security. So, I think that the threats to health coverage, Medicaid and SNAP in particular are very much on the forefront of our minds. I think that, and you can't separate these issues. Right? I mean, I think that the threats to Medicaid are, are threats to those most vulnerable in our communities, right? Who we're proud of all the progress we've made in New Mexico, but this is just, I think it's a pressure that every state is facing. And so, filling in the gaps with SNAP funding, also things, things that we've passed already that we need to continue to monitor, like implementation of, right. So things like the child tax credit, working families tax credit, right? Like, how is that money getting into the pockets of families? How can we improve uptake and things like that? And then talking about things like wealth building, guaranteed basic income, cash payment programs. Those are very much on the minds of policymakers here. We're in an election year, and so we're looking at big ideas because we have a lot of money in New Mexico with the sovereign wealth funds. So what's possible with healthcare, like expanding healthcare coverage or access to folks using state funds? What's possible in the realm of like cash payments to help families who just had a baby, or even things like baby bonds to build wealth over time, while also, being on the defensive for things like immigration policy, climate. We're looking at reducing emissions, help adjust transition away from oil and gas, where like the workforce has something viable to transition into, while we're attending to the impacts on our environment and public lands and things like that. So all these issues are interconnected. I think that childcare presents an exciting and inspiring example of like what a grassroots, a campaign, a movement can really work toward and achieve. And so I don't think there's no limit on what could possibly be next when you have that kind of vision and leadership, right?
Right. Well, you say an exciting and inspiring example for what else you can accomplish in New Mexico, but this is an exciting and inspiring example for the other 49 states. And you mentioned, that there's money available in the Sovereign Wealth Fund, but that you all need to take the victory lap for making sure the money went to this incredibly important cause, because it's easy for the money to go to more tax cuts for the wealthy or for something that's not as productive for the people who need it the most. So thank you. Thank you, Jacob, for coming on the show. Thank you to you and all of your colleagues at New Mexico Voices for Children and all your coalition members for not just what you're doing for the children and the families of New Mexico, but the example you're setting for the rest of us. So hopefully X number of years from now, we can have you on to talk about all these other states that have followed in your footsteps. But until then, thank you for coming and talking with us, and thank you for the proof of concept that this can work and can happen.
Absolutely. Thank you, Fran. Appreciate you having me.